That is true. I don't have to look it up in a book, maybe?
Yes, you will not be tested at the end, sister, I promise.
Well, yes, really, I will at the end.
Oh, different test altogether, though.
Oh,
I'm going to ask you the questions, and you're just going to look and talk to me.
so I don't have to
But-
look at that?
No, not at all.
That's good.
Okay.
Okay.
That'll make it a little bit easier. And then I always refer to Michelle, and in this case, Jeanette, if they have any other ideas of what we can talk about. If
It's
they
more casual than,
Right.
okay.
And if they ask the question, hey, tell them about so-and-so, you can just still look and talk to me.
Unless I have dementia and don't remember.
Right, and that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine. Can we talk about the highway patrol?
Yeah, please do. That's fascinating.
That's fascinating. Can you tell me about your work with the highway patrol?
It all began with, believe it or not, I was hired to, I'm not sure how old you are, but in the beginning, you would get your license from your local highway patrol station. And the license would be current in the county that you're in. And it became very evident that we needed to compile them into a state, because you see, we worked with, of all things, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, et cetera. In other words, your license connects you to all kinds of things that you may not be aware of. All right, so that it's a way of being able to find people or to help people find people. So it's much more than what people think. It's not Big Brother, though. I want to make sure that I clarify that. But it's important, and it was exciting. It was also the first time the state was using computers, and if you notice, when you go to the Highway Patrol now, they're all connected to the computer. They're talking to GHQ in Tallahassee the whole time, and GHQ is connected to the FBI. So it's a way of interlocking certain, perhaps, areas that were not before. Usually criminals, though, are not going for licenses and stuff like that.
So tell me more about that. Tell me, how long did you do this?
For about 5 years, I believe it was. And my job was, at that time, you only got your license through GHQ in Tallahassee, except when you were applying for a license. All right, and the testing and everything was given to you from GHQ, and then you would be sent back. The written testing, not the driving testing. And my job was the out-of-state and out-of-country Florida license renewal.
Okay. Wow.
It was interesting.
So with that kind of work, what made you decide to do something else?
Well, I mean, believe it or not, it wasn't because of the Highway Patrol. I happen to like the Department of Public Safety very much, but I always felt called to something more. But I wanted to have a career first. I didn't want to go from high school or from college. I wanted to know that I tested the waters more, and I wasn't just moving into something familiar to something familiar. And I enjoyed my time very much, and I'm very grateful for that. So it's not like a good, bad, or anything like that. It was wonderful.
Can you describe yourself as a child? What kind of...
I was inquisitive, and probably naughty in my younger years.
Tell me how.
My sister and I always came up with options. That one summer we were punished every single day, not because we repeated anything. We just were creative in the naughty line. One of the worst things we probably did is we took the furniture in our bedroom outside our bedroom windows and put it in the backyard so we could have ranches. And my mother didn't realize what was going on. But we had our beds out there and everything. We got into a lot of trouble. I mean, it's not like we weren't punished, but we were very creative in the naughty department.
Okay. Are you still naughty today?
I don't think I should answer that question, but I do go to confession. But I'm not taking the furniture out onto the highways.
Okay.
Through the windows.
Not yet, anyway.
Don't think I will be, but anyway.
Okay.
Might be nice on the porch in the hot weather or something, but
So tell me about school.
Well, I'm not in school currently, you realize. I loved education, and I love the students. I love challenging them. I believe that sometimes, to quote, I'm a Star Trek enthusiast, but to boldly go where you've never gone before, to help children, young people go outside their perimeter in the right sort of way, to ask questions, and to make them dig, not just to give the answer. Today, sometimes I feel that that's kind of missing because there's so much information that they have to grasp. The computer world, which I'm all for, I love Star Trek and Spock, please, but one of the things it does is those questions kind of get deadened. The big questions that the 60s was always asking, or the later times. Sometimes today that's to become educated, to become professional, to get the job of their dream. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's more to that, to life than that, the big questions. My generation's probably was challenged by civil rights and the Vietnam War. Those are big questions, and my generation was very much involved with both those things. They were the ones going to Vietnam or running to Canada or protesting and marching.
So during that time period, what were you up to?
Well, I was in the Red Cross, and I was supporting the guys overseas. I felt very strongly that it was wrong for my generation, my peers, some of them, to the people that got punished with all of the protesting wasn't Washington, it wasn't the people making the decisions, it was the guys coming back. I don't know if you realize this, but they would come back in uniform and they'd be spit at. It got to the point when they came back to the country, they did not wear their uniforms so that wouldn't happen, but there's something wrong with that. And I'm glad that that's changed. That whole perimeter's changed. But they were really wounded. Here they went to represent us and to fight for us, and then they were punished more when they came home. That was really bad. And some of them never came home. I mean, they went to places like Dahlonega. They stayed outside of society. We wounded them, some of them, when they came back, which was really wrong to me. So I was in the Red Cross at that time. So I was not the normal, I was not a hippie or anything like that. I was the other side. Yeah.
So from the Red Cross, what were the other steps?
Well, I worked for the state. I was in the Highway Patrol at GHQ. I converted some of your licenses from the old record into the new record. And I issued licenses from out of state and out of country. That was fascinating to see where Americans were. And you had to have the test. So if you think that if you're out of country you don't have to take the test, that's not true. We arranged for you to have the test. For Florida, I'm not arranging tests for France. The driving rules and laws there are different, for example.
For a second, just going back to Star Trek, so are you a purist, or is it the original TV series, or did you?
Star Trek is Star Trek's 5-year mission, which you always hear with the original series, and this is something they carry through, and your what I call authentic Star Trek, whether it's Next Generation or whatever, is to take the problems of our current time and to focus them so far into the future that you can look at them without becoming emotionally engaged. In fact, at FSU, we had to keep cards on each episode to find out what sociological issue they were talking about. And when I watch it now, it's like they're preaching at you, because it's that obvious. The lesson plan is there, the issue stated, and of course this is the natural outcome, unless you're a dud. Yes, so, and the Klingons they were the current, well, I don't know if I should say who they were because it might cause international problems, but it was always between the Cold War. All right, the people that they were having problems with, it was the Cold War. So some of them were the communists and the Chinese, and
So there was that overlay of the current situation.
always. Yes, in fact, in FSU even, you kept cards on those series. Some of the spin-offs that came later, that wasn't always true, but the original was very much that way. In fact, when I watch it now, it's kind of like Shakespeare comes out and hits you in the head, and you may not think that the solution to the problem is the correct one today, but it's obvious what they're doing.
I had forgotten about that. That's very true.
And Spock is your ultimate example of integration. And you notice in that series, the most important thing was you liked him. If he wasn't someone who was caught in the middle of the integration war that was going on at the time, so you're on his side. So it broadened people's perspective that hopefully they would be able to look at the current situation better of that time.
Sister Edith, share with Rich how you use Star Wars to teach the children at Bishop Queen High School.
Yeah, no, Star Wars is different. Star Wars I used, just as the missionaries of 2,000 years ago used things like shamrocks, things that were valuable to the people they were trying to call to Christ, they would lift it up. And Star Wars, George Lucas was trying to revitalize what he calls the old-time religion. It's acting out scripture. Sometimes he does get into Hinduism or Buddhism a little bit too much, but it's there, and the students were hungering for it. Well, I don't have to tell you, it's not like students were hungering for it. That whole generation was absorbed into it. So just as the missionaries of old would listen to the culture, okay, and then call them to Christ by using that culture. If I had used my time, and that's what I was finding, if I used the 60s, for example, motifs, it's not relevant anymore. But so you have to call them to Christ where they are and how God is working among them and calling them to the truth. The problem with Star Wars is it's more Hindu and Buddhist than it is Judeo-Christianity. So the individual gets lost, So it brings them to the book. It brings them to the scripture. In fact, George Lucas even refers to some of his, in some of his work as the book. He talks about the old book, and it's scripture. And his whole idea was to try and revitalize it because he saw in California, he talks about this, I'm sure you are aware, that people were turning to the Oriental world when in fact they had lost their own roots, and how exciting and vitalizing it was. You do know that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I've heard bits and pieces, but I had never, gotten into it too deep to know whether it was.
He was interviewed and several on the educational stations several times, and people were kind of depressed when they heard about it because they always thought he was trying to promote the Oriental religion, but he put it in a box that way because so many people in America were turning to the East for a spirituality that they didn't see alive and well in Judeo-Christianity. And he was trying to bring them back to Judeo-Christianity, not as a proselytizer or a missionary, but to show that it's already here. It's not something you have to import from another country.
That's fascinating.
He talks about that himself.
Well, I like hearing you talk about it
Yeah.
because from your perspective, it really makes sense. It validates it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he was on PBS, and some of my students were disappointed because they listened to him, because it was some people wanted. This is kind of scary to me. I don't mean just students. I mean people in articles I read wanted him to create a religion, and that he was already at the threshold of doing that, and he was shocked at that. What he was trying to do was revitalize something that's already alive that people pretty well had explained away, or we had shrouded it so much in intellectualism that it no longer had that umph, which of course Star Wars has a lot of umph. Mm-hmm.
So he was just repackaging it and saying it's already here.
Yes. For example, a lot of the things he'll quote from is when Jesus said, if you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to the mountain to move and it would. What do you see in Star Wars? And remember, Luke can't do some of the things, and it's because he doesn't believe. He doesn't have faith. And Yoda in Hebrew means wise man. So it's fascinating. The kids were both excited and kind of disappointed when I finished with that, because they were hoping for something a little more, I guess, thrilling and Star Wars-y. And one of the big themes of spirituality is that we are in a war between, I don't want to be too dramatic, good and evil, but there is truth to that. And our society tries to make it sound like it's all the same. It's a choice between apples and apricots, but it's not. They're choices that form me in ways that are life-giving or death-dealing. So Darth Vader, for example, as the story unfolds, is not coming out of hell, as some kind of monster. You find out he was a man that made some really bad decisions. But when he made those bad decisions, you kind of understand why, which is also part of what good and evil does. You don't just get there because you were born a baby fiend, and you grow up as a baby fiend. And that was true of Adolf Hitler. What could Hitler have been if he had made different decisions? Or Stalin. I'm not suggesting that these are, damn souls, but at the same time, perhaps they did make some rather horrendous decisions. But you and I could do some of the same things if we had the opportunity. Who are we is the big question, and how we answer that. And that's where Star Wars and other people, and a big one is Scripture. I want to make sure you understand, as far as George Lucas is concerned, he's trying to bring the book back. When he keeps talking about the book, it's the Bible. If you had the faith the size of a mustard seed, all right, you'd say to the mountain it would move, or the tree, or the X-wing. Okay. And remember, when it doesn't move, because Luke can't lift it in his mind because he thinks it's his mind, Yoda tells him, Yoda means in Hebrew wise man. That's why you fail. You have to believe. You have to have faith. It's not me. But we think it's us, or it's me.
You could tell him how many thousands of students you taught using that theology when he's ready to ask you a question.
Oh, gosh. I had about oh my word. I had 175 students times roughly, let's say 20 years. It's really 30 years, but it may have been less than. That's a lot of people.
And you've always used this teaching method.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I was not promoted by George Lucas or anything like that. But what I saw one of my early years of education was that the theology that we were asked to teach and the students' lives were going like this. They weren't connecting. And the missionaries of old, that's how we got Christmas trees and Advent wreaths, etc., listened to the culture and then brought Christ into the culture. And then the people could make connection. And that's what I did. When I saw, it took me a long time but when I saw Star Wars, I got it, what George Lucas was up to. For a long time, I poo-pooed it. I even refused to see it. The students wanted me to see it. And that was another invitation from Christ, because you see, the cultural venue to make the connection is the invitation of the people. That's why the missionaries of old would go out and listen first and see how God was indirectly preparing them. Notice indirectly for his coming. In Judaism, it was direct. Okay, and then the missionary would make the connection. That's how we got Christmas trees, Advent wreaths, and it goes on and on and on. Okay, so that the connection is valid. Sometimes we didn't do that, and that's where in South America sometimes we had people who totally misunderstood what was being said to them and started a lot of bad theology from our point of view because the connection wasn't made. So how was God indirectly preparing them? So how was God indirectly preparing this generation to hear the word? too many times we think when you read a book in theology, the connection is made. When in fact in Scripture, it's always made through the gut. It's through life experience. So the students got so excited with Star Wars when I was involved with them. I even refused to go and see it. I went with the first movie with them because they wanted me to go, and I went, and I'm in the movie theater, and I had to put, I shouldn't tell you this because they'll know now, but I had to put something in my mouth to keep me from laughing. Because what they kept telling me was, this is the most profound movie they've ever seen, and dot, 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 dot. And I saw every theme in Hollywood in Star Wars. I really did. And it wasn't even, let's just say I've seen better drama in certain places. But anyway, so I didn't go and see the second one or the third one. And then when I did go to the third one, I felt like a fool, because then I saw what George Lucas was doing. The third one is very profound. And then it took me a long time to get to see the second one. I read the books first, and I really felt idiotic. But the first one really was every theme Hollywood ever imagined, So, and the reason I kept laughing was because that's what they thought Star Trek was. Now, I'm a Star Trek enthusiast. There was no Star Trek in that at all. Let me tell you, no. It was like two cultures passing in the night, And so much in Star Trek was really scientific. NASA loved Star Trek, Nothing that they did was outside the parameter of what we have to be able to do to go into space. They even account for gravity and all of that. I'm telling you that because in Star Wars they could care less. They're just in space. And they even use different words, hyperdrive. I saw myth in Star Wars immediately. I did see that. That's not a bad word. I'm a humanities major first, and so I have great meaning in Star and myth. But there's a big difference between myth and Star Trek. See, so it was very embarrassing, but I was laughing through the image. And then I didn't go to see the second one because I was afraid it would be another humorous moment for me. So when I finally saw the Return of the Jedi, I was stunned. And then I wanted to see the Empire, to see what he had done there. But I never saw science fiction in the Return of the Jedi either. But I did see redemption. I saw the remarkable trilogy of calling people back to life. Darth Vader is simply a walking dead man. He became a caricature of what his potential was. And it's interesting, it's an allegory as well. Everything, if you read the books and you even hear it, Anakin Skywalker, he becomes again a dreamer, an ability to transcend himself. Darth Vader is a man of death. But when I first saw that, there's a big difference between that kind of imagery and science or Star Trek, which is, something else. So what George Lucas does is very profound. And he gets those, he goes that way because that's what Scripture is a lot, to transcend ourselves by the grace of God. And that's one of the things he shows in his trilogy. And it's kind of dangerous in one way because some people don't see it, but you don't transcend yourself. God's grace enables you to transcend. If I try to transcend myself, I could become an Adolf Hitler or something lovely like that, not just a noble person. I could become a noble person. We do have those examples, but so many things can come to play. But God's grace can go through all of that. Our modern time, and this is one of the reasons why George Lucas does this, we have a hard time believing that God acts. We use God language, but many times we get the idea that I do it, you do it, that you're doing it right now. But in actuality, God works through us, and we need to be in touch with that through prayer. That's the part today in our secular society which can be just as dangerous as a communist totalitarian belief system, because we don't believe God acts. And that's kind of a scary thing. I don't mean when I say we, I mean our culture. Where was God? Even when I was in high school, where was God at Auschwitz? Where was God at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And there you get into the debate of free will and all of that. God gives us free will, and we have to live with that consequence. You can't say, all right, the human race is about to do something really pretty terrible, therefore we'll remove that. That's the scary part. Instead of facing ourselves, we blame God. Isn't that interesting? But it's true. Where was God? Well, where were we?
So in the same vein, which was part of the focus of this documentary, sort of underlying as I'm trying to build it up, you're the perfect person to talk about your ideas about the power of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And you've given masterful examples of how it's done in the secular world. But talk a little bit about your ideas of the power of storytelling and passing on.
That's one of the things that I noticed when I went away. I got a wonderful opportunity to go and study Scripture. That's what God does. How much of the Scriptures, of course, some people used it as a weapon, but, the parables are only one example. But story is told even if they're historical stories, they're to teach a lesson that I have to take within myself. And the way I would take it in today may be very different from the way I would take it in whatever. We Greco-Romans, which is one of the terms I use, we get all lost in, like the creation story, the 7 days. It's to the point now I almost want to go, it's silly. You take a story where the story is, which is strange because these same people will take Star Wars right where it is and has no problem with it whatsoever, but let it be in Genesis and the world falls apart. But God uses stories. Jesus uses stories. And the reason he does that is because you and I can never define it. It's always greater than we are because we keep growing. We see more. All right? If it's God is God, suddenly, well, okay, I put a period there and I can move. It has no meaning. But if God is involved in my life, just as you are involved in my life right now, the way you're involved now may not be the way, let's say, if we knew each other 20 years from now, because we've grown. And that's what Scripture is like. God keeps waiting, in the fullness of time. The fullness of time is us. When we've grown a little bit more, like a parent with a child, when we've grown a little bit more, then the relationship is deeper and deeper and deeper by his desire, which we call grace, all right, and which we are open to. So it's really, it's true with your friends or your family. It's an invitation where hopefully that relationship gets deeper and deeper and deeper, but sometimes there's casualties in that department. Friendship today, we all want it and long for it, but how many of our stories are built on the opposite of what can happen? See, so we're hungering for it, but that hunger was given to us by God. And ultimately, as Paul said, it's only in him that it's full. And George Lucas himself wanted to awaken that hunger again. That's why he keeps using the term old-time religion. Because what he saw was so many people had reduced religion to theology, to ideas about, to what Scripture means, because he's of the Protestant background, rather than the relationship, walking the talk, in communion with a person, not an idea or a theology or a doctrine, but walking the walk with a presence, with a person. All of that other stuff is true, but you can go and read a book in psychology about marriage or friendship, but that's not the same thing as being married or having friends. But God invites us to a friendship to walk, right, in communion with him, and therefore with each other. Without that communion, it's very hard to even have communion with each other. That's why you have so many international concerns and issues. And families have issues. Okay? It's hard, but wonderful.
7 minutes.
Oh my goodness. I could just listen to you all day long. You're wonderful. So what makes you happy? What brings you joy?
Wow, so many things. I love mornings. I think because to me, that is when God is most transparent. He's very visible in the mornings. And then you go through so much during the day that at nighttime, I love the evening, but the mornings is like a new day, a new creation, a new life, and a new sense of energy that you get, but that presence is so present then for me. That doesn't mean that he's not there at night. It's just that I'm too tired perhaps to perceive it. So, but and it's like that's the way the Psalms are too. The morning is an energy building, activity and what the day is in God and God's action. And the nighttime is the opposite, is, letting go, and like the child is simply, because you can't do much else than that. Yeah. So it's interesting. For God, there is no limitation. He's just as present at night as he is, but it's the creature that it can't be.
You have given us so much to bridge all of these different themes that we want to try to talk about in the documentary. And
Well, I'm glad I was of some help then.
Sister Edith is a brilliant Old Testament scripture
you,
scholar.
you were the anchor for this. I can tell you that already. This has been fantastic.
And the Old Testament, not that you're going to tape this, but the Old Testament is so important for us today because those people were trying to anchor themselves. And you see, as sophisticated as our culture is, we've lost that. When the world I grew up in, as the kids will tell you, millions of years ago in a galaxy far, far away, it was a faith-centered culture. Everybody went to church. And it wasn't just going to the building. It was a way of life. There were certain things. You never bothered families on Sunday because of the Sunday dinner and all of that. It was a day for the family. The world was very different. Today, it's almost like people are in a bus station going to different localities all the time. A lot of kids today talk about the fact they never have a dinner together except for big holidays. And that's kind of sad. And one of the big things about Judeo-Christianity, especially Judaism, because Christianity, of course, is a victim of our culture in a way, is the meal. To be a family, to be together. And you can't be a family in name only. You have to have time together to share a meal. Breaking bread is very important. We've kind of lost that. People go, I'm not going to eat this, I'm going to go get a hamburger or whatever. Kids are very open about that. But those are the ways where the family breaks down, not just divorces. It's where we aren't breaking bread together. Because when you break bread together, you are simply, to use a nice word, you're contemplating one another. You're simply dwelling with each other. And isn't it interesting on TV, I notice of late, like the shows I watch, they show the meal. They'll show the families eating a meal. I can't think of the show right now, but they're breaking bread together. And I thought, I wish, if anything I was hearing toward the end of my teaching career is they don't have time to eat together, except they'll still talk about Thanksgiving and Christmas.
That show you're talking about, Sister, was Blue Bloods. You told me about Blue Bloods.
Okay, Blue Bloods. Okay, yeah, Blue Bloods. And I was hoping. I said, "Wow, this is good that TV is beginning to talk about it." But you see, that's sharing a meal. And notice in Scripture, that's one of the big things, isn't it? Even God took time to give food, to break bread, to eat together, because you commune when you're eating. It's not just you're eating, but you're humanizing one another. And kids today, the ones I've had in the last few years, they talk too much about the fact that they would get a TV dinner and go to their room. They're communing with technology. And I am not one of those people that want to take technology and throw it out the window. I believe that's a prohibition like before. I mean, it's not the TV, it's not the computer, it's family life. That's the issue. If for example, in religious life, we still eat together and talk together and commune. We're not all in our bedrooms watching the TVs. So the problem is, where are our priorities in the sense of humanizing each other? in family life.
Speaking of eating together, sister, we got about 5 minutes before I take you back to lunch. But I think I want to talk to you again.
Yes, we can stop for now, but
Okay.
you are a gold mine.
Oh, I don't know about that.
You are.